I'm at a stone circle called the Nine Stones, just outside Winterbourne Abbas in Dorset, sometimes known as the Devil's Stones or the Dancing Ladies. And like a lot of stone circles, there are stories about how dancing wedding guests have been turned into stone. But I'm here to tell you another story, another local legend about how in summertime, in midsummer, these stones are said to have the power of movement, and they take themselves down to the little stream below us, the southern Winterbourne, and on midsummer's morning they drink from the water and shuffle back up into their places.
Once there were two neighbours, two farmers who owned two pieces of land on either side of the village of Winterbourne Abbas. But even though they were brought up in the same place, Dorset born, bred and buttered, as men, they were as different from one another as chalk from cheese. The first farmer was called Zebedee. He was an easy-going, laid-back, fun-loving sort of fella. He only worked as much as he needed, and the rest of his time he devoted to sipping cider and singing songs. He was never happier than with a pint pot in his hand and a tune on his lips. I have fields, I have flowers, I have orchards and bowers, and the lark is my daily alarmer. But the second farmer, his name was Zachary, and he was the exact opposite of his nonchalant neighbour. He was hard-nosed, stony-faced and tight-fisted. He didn't waste his precious time on dancing and drinking and making merry. He'd rather be making money. He often sneered with contempt at Zebedee with his wild and wanton ways. He'll never make anything of his life, while I'll make a fortune from my own farm. Well, the seasons cycled round, each man attending to the affairs of his own heart. And one night at the eve of summer solstice, Zebedee had been down at a friend's cider shed, drinking and dancing, and it was in the early hours of the morning when he found himself stumbling home, which took quite a while. It wasn't the length of the road, it was the width of the road that bothered him. But as he walked home, he found himself passing by the stone circle at the edge of the village known as the Nine Ladies. Suddenly, he heard a strange creaking sound, and that was followed by an even stranger music that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. Flint and mica, limestones, shale and sarsens, After that, there was a much louder soil-slurping, stone-scraping sort of sound. He watched with wide, cidery eyes as two of those standing stones wriggled up and out of their earth-bound sockets and slowly, steadily began to creep along the ground, down towards a little stream running nearby. There, they bent down with a creak and a crack and started to drink the water with a slow but unmistakable gulp. Ooh. 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 Zebedee was wonderstruck for a moment, but then he ran like a startled hare back to his farmhouse to sleep off the strangeness of that night. But the next day, the sights and sounds were still livid and vivid in his head, and so needing to tell somebody, he went to see his old neighbour, Zachary. Oh, how he laughed when he heard Zebedee's crazy story of standing stones walking down to the stream. Well, you must have had a proper dose last night, Zebedee, you drunken fool. I've never heard of so much rubbish in all my life. But it's true, said Zebedee. My father, come to think of it, he always said the stones come alive at summer's solstice, and now I've seen it with my own eyes. They're sacred stones, you mark my words. The only thing that's sacred to me is money, and the only thing them old stones are good for is building. So it was. The next week, Zachary arranged for farmhands and workhorses to dig up and drag two of the standing stones from the circle onto his own farm. And there he used them as cornerstones to build a big barn and to keep his grain and machinery in the horse cart. The two great stones, they formed the front of the barn with a girt timber beam on the top. And when it was finished, he stood back to admire his creation, a visible symbol of all his success and superiority. Another cycle of the seasons around the wheel of the year. And it was the eve of summer solstice once more. Zebedee, of course, was making merry with songs and stories and cider, but Zachary was already tucked up in bed, fast asleep, until he was awoken around midnight by a strange, eerie sound coming through the window, and then a weird music that made him sit bolt upright in bed and fearful. Getting out of bed and looking through the window, he could see his beloved barn, quivering and quaking as if it was trying to move. Pulling on his pants, he ran outside in time to hear the sound of slurping soil and scraping stone. He watched in a mix of amazement and fear as the stones began to slowly shuffle out of position. Zachary rushed forward, trying in vain to push them back and save the barn, but it was too late. One more shift, and the large wooden crossbeam came crashing down and struck him dead, buried on his own farm by his own arrogant folly. Well, the stones, meanwhile, continued making their way inexorably forward to the stream for their yearly seasonal sip before lumbering back to their ancient rightful places in the stone circle, where they still are to this day. Go and have a look for yourself.
And as for Zebedee, he continued to celebrate the seasons. He continued drinking late at night. And sometimes when he came through the stone circle, he might have heard the sound of the stones singing their midsummer song.
Flint and mica, limestone, shale and sarsen, sandstone soil. Flint and mica.